Your little intro. You're a technical program coordinator with NC Choices, correct?
That's right.
All right, and we're excited to have you present today. I'm gonna go ahead and put myself on mute and no video, but one more thing just to remind everybody, if you guys, as Alicia said when you came in, just please send your email in the chat so that we can send this webinar back out to you. Okay, thank you so much, Lee.
Cool. All right. Well, thank y'all all for joining us this evening. As Amy said, my name's Lee Menas. I work for the NC Choices program at NC State University, and we're a program that focuses a lot on niche meat processing and supporting niche meat producers in North Carolina. So, you know, our 20-year history has been that we work with developing markets and have done a lot of work around processing local meats, and sorry, sitting here trying to get my screen going, and getting and providing support to our niche meat producers. And so this evening we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to do local meat production, pricing, and marketing in North Carolina. We'll go through this, and I'll kind of roll through. If you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat box, and Andy and Amy, if y'all don't mind kind of monitoring the chat box, and if somebody's got a question, you can interrupt me. We're going to try to go through this fairly quickly and try to leave plenty of questions for Q&A at the end. But we really want to give you a primer in local meat production and selling local meats. And so, you know, as y'all are as sheep producers that are existing, you know, you've probably already decided on your means of production, and you have your production set, you have your breed genetics selected. You know, you're just looking at this mainly from like an alternative marketplace. Is what can I do with these lambs to add a little value to them, and what can I do to, you know, add a little value to my operation, and maybe take advantage of some of this. You know, here in the last couple of months, we've seen a real meat panic at the grocery stores. As you go into grocery stores and the meat aisles are completely empty. And that's driven a lot of people that normally have not had local meats on their radars to look around and see who's in their neighborhood and who's selling meats and reach out to them. And that's been an opportunity for our small farms in North Carolina to take advantage of. So as you get into this, and like I said, you've probably already decided on your production, but you got to figure out what's your advantage. You know, what is the plus? What's going to bring people to you? And, you know, what species we're talking about lamb here, and what kind of production. You know, there's an opening for just about anything you want to do. If heard a guy once say, if you can figure out how to make a purple cow, I'm sure there's a market for it somewhere. And so, you know, whether you want to do all grass fed, or whether you're doing organic production and organic feed, or you're doing just conventional grain fed production, it's out there. You know, there's an opportunity for any of those. You just got to identify that market and get your product in front of those folks. But you also got to think about what's your capacity, because that can help you to decide a lot on what your market is. You know, if you're talking about raising a few lambs a year and slaughtering a few lambs a year, you're probably not going to need to target restaurants. You know, our restaurants, somebody that's going to be looking for 20, 30, 50 pounds or more of meat on a weekly basis. If you don't have the capacity to supply that, don't chase that market, because at the end of the day, they'll let you down and you'll let them down, and it won't be good. But try to figure out what that market is that matches your capacity. And look around you and see what your processing options are. This is hard to believe sometimes in North Carolina, but when I talk to people from other states, North Carolina's in a great spot when it comes to processing for individuals. I talk to people out in the Midwest, and even where they have meat lockers seemingly on every corner, there are very few places that are willing to do a labeled product under inspection that you can turn around and take off and sell. But you still need to look around. North Carolina, even though we do have a lot of options, you know, we've got about 31 inspected processors in the state that do work for meat handlers currently. and you need to look around and see who's near you and what's their capacity. Because right now with the COVID stuff going on in the last 3 months, whereas if you come to me and ask me in January, what do I need to think about? Processing would have been a thought, but not a very serious one, because most of the processors you could slide in and get an animal on the schedule within about 2 or 3 week period, if not maybe a month. But given the situation we're in now, all of our processing capacity in North Carolina has been booked up pretty much for the next year. Everyone I know of is looking at processing. And when I say in processing, I mean to get an animal slaughtered and then cut and packaged with a label on it. Those options are really limited, and most of the processors are booked through the end of this year and on into, many of them into April, May, and June of next year already. So you need to take a hard look at your processing options right now, especially if you're new and getting into this, and consider how that's going to affect when your animals are ready and what you're able to offer. Most of all, make a plan and know your cost. You probably already got your breeds and your genetics selected, but look at those and think about, your genetics, matching your genetics to your feed programs. Sheep, we personally have raised mainly Katahdin and Dorpers on our farms. They're smaller framed, smaller muscled animals than like a Hampshire or bigger woolly breeds. But you need to think about your feed program and matching your feed program to match your genetics. Those bigger framed animals may need a little extra feed to get them up to where you want them and get the amount of marbling and fat on them that you want it. And then once again, look at your processing and think about your marketing. Where are you going to market to? Who are your primary customers? How are you going to get in front of those people and let them know that you have lamb for sale? And think about your price point. Lamb's a little unique because lamb has pretty much always had a higher price point, and we'll go over a little bit of that reasoning for that. But know your price point. Look around, see what others are charging, and see if it's a price point where you can make money at. I mean, because the thing is, you've got to know what your costs are, and you've got to know, what it costs to produce that animal, and then you got to be able to weigh that out realistically against what you can expect to get for that animal. And think about your volume too. There's a big difference between if you're hauling one sheep or one lamb to the processor at a time versus 100 lambs. That cow trailer going down the road pretty much costs the same whether you've got a full load of lambs on there or you got one lamb on. So if it costs you $30 to go to the processor, if you've got one lamb, then that's a $30 additional cost you're soaking up there. If you got 100 lambs, then that's 30 cents a lamb. You're adding to that final price point. So when it comes to processing, I give you the quick and skinny on this. This is the Cliff Notes version. If you're doing red meat, it must be slaughtered under inspection, and that's by either USDA or the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. North Carolina runs a state inspection program, and the states that do that, not all states do, but a lot of them do, their inspection program must meet or exceed the expectations of USDA. And so to have an NCDA mark means that, it's the same level of inspection as any USDA plant you're going to come. It's going to meet that same criteria. The other thing you're going to have is going to be a meat handler's license. If you plan on handling that animal post-slaughter and processing, so if you take the animal and you take it to Piedmont Custom Meats and you get them to process the lamb for you, you go pick the lamb up, you bring it home, put it in your freezer, and then you sell it out either piece by piece or you sell out boxes of lamb. That requires you have a meat handler's license. And that's basically a way that NCDA, they'll come out and they'll check on you every year. But it's a way for them to keep up with who's in the business. And they do differentiate. Not only is this required of farmers, this is required of any retailer that maintains, handles that animal and transports meat. So they maintain this list on their website. Really easy. It's a free service provided by NCDA. But you will need one of those if you plan on handling it. If you plan on taking the animal to a processor and you've sold that animal at that point and the customer will be picking up from the processor, you do not need a meat handler's license. First example here, this round emblem. This is the mark of inspection for a USDA plant. The brands always have is a circular brand. It's US inspected and passed Department of Agriculture, and each of those will have an establishment number attached to it. That establishment number allows for a degree of traceability back to the plant should problems occur, that you can follow it back. If it's an NCDA inspected plant, it'll be a trapezoidal stamp, and it's inspected and passed by NCDA. And the P107 or P007 is the plant number, so it'll be P007, P351, P370, and you can see those are, you know, much lower than the establishment numbers, which is the same for USDA. Those identify those individual places. Now, the main difference between these two seals is, even though the same level of inspection, if your product carries that trapezoid with NCDA on it, product must be sold within the state boundaries of North Carolina. So if you're on the verge, you know, on the border of Virginia or Tennessee or Georgia or South Carolina, or close to it, and you think, hey, I might want to go to a farmer's market in South Carolina, then you need to look around and find a USDA plant for you to legally take that product across the border and sell it. Could be it needs to be USDA inspection. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have customers come up from South Carolina and purchase a product from you at your farm that has an NCDA inspection. That's perfectly fine. As long as the selling transaction takes place within the state boundaries of North Carolina, you're in good shape. A little bit more about the meat handler's license. It's a free service provided by NCDA. And to register for this, you call the NCDA Meat and Poultry Inspection Service. If you go to the NCDA website, there's the main number for the Meat and Poultry Inspection Division. And you call them, you say, hey, I would like to register as a free meat handler. And what they're going to do is they're going to call you. They're going to say, all right, that sounds great. They're going to ask you a few questions first. And they're going to say, do you have product on hand? And if you say no, then they're going to say, call me back when you do have product on hand. But once you have product on hand, they're going to come out and they're going to look at a few things. And one of the things is they're going to look and they're going to ask you, they say, how are you transporting this? And it's perfectly fine to operate in a cooler. They do not issue, USDA nor NCDA issues a thing where it says if you have frozen meat and transport, it has to be held at 20 degrees or 10 degrees or 0 degrees, anything like that. They're going to tell you that if it is transported in a frozen state, it must remain in a frozen state. So they're going to look and they're going to ask you, how are you transporting it? Most people are going to say, we'll put it in a cooler and we're transporting it. It takes us 30 minutes to get back from the processors, or an hour or whatever. And they're going to say, all right, that's what we want to see. Let's see the coolers. They want to just kind of make sure they're quality, you know, they're looking basically to make sure you're transporting in a safe and sanitary conditions. And next thing they're going to look at is that you have to maintain a dedicated storage. To be a meat handler, you have to have a freezer space or refrigerated space that is dedicated to your inspected product. For most people, that is a dedicated freezer. And they're looking at it and they're going to look at it from the standpoint of, A, is it a safe, clean, functional freezer that it's in? They're basically looking to make sure, you know, it's not an old dilapidated freezer that's kicking on and off every 30 minutes and thawing your meat and then refreezing it. And they're going to look at it and they're going to say, all right, you know, make sure it's not in the back of a shed somewhere on the back 40 of your farm with rats climbing around on it. Or, you know, in the back of the lamb barn with lambs rubbing up against it and all. They're just looking for clean, dedicated storage. Now, it's dedicated. It also means that, you know, you cannot put your deer that you killed during deer season can't be in there. You can't have chicken pot pies that your grandma sent home with you the other day. This dedicated freezer space, refrigeration space, has to be for inspected meat products only. And then they're going to look for the inspected legends on the processes there. And then about once a year, they're just going to pop in and do a checkup on you and do an annual visit. And usually they used to be about 10 years ago, they would call you and set it up the day before. Nowadays, they just show up. You know, they're not going out of their way to surprise you, but they don't, you know, their theory is they want to see what you're doing. And the only way to do that is with random visits. But you can usually count on, if they show up in April the first time, they're probably going to be there in April every year thereafter. It's usually a pretty easy thing. They'll come in, they'll ask you about what you've been doing, kind of ask you about your numbers, where you're processing at, and then they'll want to see in your freezer, and they'll poke around your freezer for a few minutes, and they'll give you a report, and shake your hand, and say goodbye. So when you're thinking about this, as you get into these, looking at and thinking about what kind of marketing do you want to do? And there's a lot of different avenues you can go. And a lot of them depend on what your volume is, what your end goals are, and what your tolerance for risk is. So, you know, thinking about where you're going to sell, setting up a farm store, or going to farmers markets are relatively easy things. Maybe you already have a farm store that's you're selling a few vegetables out of. You could add a freezer to that. Going to farmers markets usually gets you nice exposure. But, you know, it's trade-off is you're spending your Saturdays, Friday evenings, getting ready your Saturdays, sitting there talking to people. A lot of people have moved to online stores. Nowadays, you can go on the platforms like Square and set up an online store in no time. And if you're like me, you know, sometimes you got to call your kids in, or maybe your grandkids, and get them to help you, walk you through it. But it's not that difficult to get those set up. And then, you know, freezer sales, the traditional freezer beef, freezer pork, freezer lamb markets, where customers purchase a whole animal from you, or whole animals. You know, sometimes you may end up with a restaurant and lamb's one of those things that, you know, a lot of restaurants don't go through a ton of lamb. But, you know, the opportunity to sell them a lamb every few weeks or a couple times a year can be an option, and take those whole animals. And it saves you a little bit on the processing. You don't have to worry about moving that whole animal and trying to sell all the pieces. And then if you're a big enough volume producer, then, you know, you maybe look at wholesale market. And one of the challenges of the wholesale market is what you're trading is. You're trading a lot of volume for a lower margin. And when you get into the wholesale game, you end up having to directly compete with those cheaper commodity animals. And I'm sure many of y'all and sheep producers in North Carolina are aware, you know, you get to competing with New Zealand or Australian or out west lamb, and it can be a real financial challenge. But, you know, once again, matching your production to your marketing, or your marketing to your production. If you're already in there, look at these and figure out which of these offer you the biggest bang for the buck, and that allow you to move the amount of lambs you want to market in a year's time. And one thing to remember is customers always want transparency. And one thing about it is, within the farming community, by gosh, you know, everybody seems to know what everybody else is doing, at least to a pretty close degree. And the other farms are going to hold you to it. So if you're the used car salesman of the group and you're sitting there going, oh yeah, you want a grain-fed lamb? I've got grain-fed lamb. And the next customer walks up and says, do you have grass-fed lamb? And you say, yeah, I've got grass-fed lamb right here, 100% grass-fed. People figure this stuff out really quickly, and it will kill your marketing. It may take a little bit, but there's a lot of farms that have moved away from direct marketing just because of this reason. So whatever you're doing, like I said, there's a market for it. Just be straight up with your customers. Explain why you do it and why it's important to you, and your customers will appreciate that. One thing about price point is, you know, you really have got to think about this when you look at your customers. And this can be a challenge depending on where you're at. Hey, lamb's kind of a unique product. Even in the lamb and goats, the largest consumed meat in the world. In the U.S. and especially in the Southeast, it's not traditionally as heavily consumed as beef and pork and chicken. And so, you know, it's kind of a niche within the niche. And so as you think about the price point, the trade-off is the people that enjoy lamb are willing to pay for it. But there's still a price point that determines how much you can charge, depending on where you're at. That could be a significant change. So if you're in Hyde County, in Englehart, North Carolina, your price point for lamb is probably not going to be the same as if you're in Durham, North Carolina. Or if you're in Rutherford County, it may be challenging to get as high a price as you would in Charlotte. So, think about your price point and look around and figure out how can you compete with the prices. And first thing to do is do some scouting. Look at your farmers markets. Go see who else is selling lamb. Because you want to know whether the market's saturated or not. And look at your groceries. Even look at your grocery stores. I do not recommend pricing based off of what they're selling at Food Lion or Piggly Wiggly or Harris Teeter, but it's worth noting. Every now and then, depending on what the commodity market's doing, it could actually work to be that prices in the grocery store fluctuate much more than local lamb prices. And also, NCDA sends out monthly reports on pasture-raised meat prices. They do one for beef, they do one for pork, for poultry, and for lamb and goat. Or lamb, excuse me, not goat. And we send those out through our NC Choices listserv. If you're not on there, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll be glad to add you to that list. But those reports give you an idea of what the farmers market prices are for those local meats. When you're looking at things, look at it and figure out, can you add value over what others are doing in order to get a higher price point that suits your marketing needs? Is there a special quality? Do you have a better quality product, or do you have a special niche? Is there convenience like home delivery, or, what are those options that you can do that are not being fulfilled by others? Because if you offer those, people will pay extra for those. And that gives you a chance to raise your price point and get a little bit more for those. And you just got to weigh that out over the cost. And one other thing to think about is like package size. And it's probably not as pronounced as like with beef. But when you're looking at your prices per pound, let's just use a lamb chop or a rack of lamb, for example. Rack of lambs generally are in the $20-some range. So we'll just say $22 per pound. Now, if you're raising Katahdins, your rack of lamb's probably going to be somewhere around 1.6, 1.8, maybe 2 pounds per. So at $22 a pound, that's $36 to $44 per package. A lot of times the customers can get a sticker shock from that per package price, more so than the per pound price. So $44 for a rack of lamb. Now let's compare that to a same cut, a rack of lamb out of maybe a big Hamp breed or something that dressed 100 pounds versus the 55 or 50 pound Katahdin lamb. So now you have a 4 pound rack. So now when your customer looks at that and you go to ring them up and you're like, that's $90 that you owe me for this one rack of lamb, they can have a little bit of sticker shock. So consider that when you're pricing your things in that price point. You may be able to get a higher price point, and $44 may not seem like that bad of a price. But when you get up $60, $80, $90, sometimes you can have shock on that. And one of the biggest things we found over the years was like marketing chickens. And so with the whole chicken, when we did a whole pasture-raised chicken, we were selling them for $3.50 or $4 a pound. This is several years ago. And that would be a 4 pound chicken or 5 pound chicken. So a 5 pound chicken at $4 a pound is $20 chicken. And people would balk at that. It seemed like we hit $15, $16 per package. They balked at it. The same people that would balk at a $20 chicken would gladly pay me a $10.99 a pound for boneless breast that weighed 1.25 pounds and cost $14 or $15. it was like that in package price, even though they were getting 3 times as much weight in the chicken with a whole bird, they didn't like that in package price as compared to, so they would pay me more for the smaller portions, and it didn't bother them, but to pay me less per pound, but a higher final price on the final product would make people balk on it. And so think about that when you're pricing your things and selling them. Is so if that rack of lamb's going to be $90, maybe you're better off to break it into chops and have rib chops, that instead of having 9 bones or 8 bones or whatever is in a rack of lamb, you now have 1 or 2 chops per pack, and the pack's going to be a $15 pack. And they'll buy 4 of those $15 packs and not think twice about it, but they won't buy, one with them all together. So just be considerate in that. And especially if you're raising those bigger, framey, stockier animals, you may need to consider that, and how you get your lamb cut up can influence what you can charge for that. And once again, always kind of keep an eye on the commodity pricing and what the commodity market's doing, because you don't want to underprice yourself there. I mean, if there's an option, you've got to weigh against what you want to add. You want to add value to your flock, not cost you money and cost you extra work. And so look at your commodity pricing and always keep that. Are you better? Sometimes you're better off to take those lambs straight to the sale barn and sell them when prices are high, or whenever you've got them timed right for Easter or Christmas or something, and versus going through the extra hassle of going in and processing them and selling them as meat. Because pricing is all about, you can sell it. That's usually not a problem, but can you produce it for what less than what you can sell it for and make money at it? And that's the big thing. And the only way to do that is you've got to know your cost. And I'm sure as seasoned lamb producers, everybody out there has got their cost nailed down, right? So, but that's one of the things you've just got to do. You've got to know your price. And the only way to do that is you've got to do record keeping, at least to a degree, and at least to give you a really good, comfortable number that how many pounds of feed you put into an animal, how many animals you get off your land a year, what your overhead costs, those type things. And all that has to be factored in. And what's your production, because it makes a world of difference when you spread that overhead cost over 100 ewes. If those 100 ewes produce 1 lamb a year, or they produce twins every year, that cuts your overhead cost by half. So only way to keep up with that is with record keeping production, and then also looking and seeing what are your yields, because if you're getting into selling meat, you're no longer in the lamb business. You're in the meat business, and you need to look at it. You need to figure out, what are your animals yielding? How much does it take you to get there? And how much does that carcass weight translate into sellable cuts? And once again, that goes back to record keeping. So as you go forward, if you're new to this and getting into it, make it a habit to go through and write down, how many pounds of chops did I get out of this? How many pounds of ground lamb? How many pounds of rib? How many packs of shanks, and what did they weigh? And in that way, over time, it can take you several years, but over time, you eventually build up this knowledge that you can look back and you can say, oh yeah, my lambs are averaging, they're weighing 100 pounds and they're dressing 55 or 60, 57.5 pounds whenever they're getting slaughtered. That's what the carcass weight is. And out of that carcass weight, I get X amount of pounds of meat back. And the only way you know that for sure is to keep those records. And also keeping track of your losses, because when you're in the meat business and the more you handle packages of meat, if you're putting them in the cooler, you're taking them to the farmer's market, you're not selling them, you're bringing them back, and you're handling them back out of the cooler, you're putting them back in the freezer, and the next week you're putting them back in the cooler, and you're taking them to the farmer's market, and you're taking them out, and you're showing them to people, and you're putting them back, and every time you handle those things, you risk losing the vacuum seal on those. And once those the vacuum seal breaks on them, then they start to get frostbite. And at that point, you either have to discount them, or that's what you take home and eat yourself. And so those losses also figure into what those yields are. and you've got to take that into account. And so, you know, keeping track of losses is another important part of this. So when you're calculating your cost, is basic financial cost of goods. Cost of goods is anything that goes up with the number of animals you raise. So the more animals you raise, the more stock you've got to buy, the more feed you have to buy, the more your processing bill is. Overhead costs, on the other hand, are those fixed costs. So that's your rent, maybe your land payment, the payment on that new barn or whatever that barn cost, whatever that. And it's similar to depreciation, but not necessarily this run same as tax depreciation. Depreciation, tax depreciation. We're not going to get into ag business finance, but you know, taking out those overhead rent, your rent costs the same on your farm, or your farm payments the same whether you have one sheep or whether you have 100 on there. And so if your rent costs $1,000 a year and you raise one sheep, then you've got an expense of $1,000 per lamb. If you raise 100, you got an expense of $10 per lamb. So just take that into account. And those are all things that can be depreciated. And then you also got your labor, and that's both paid and unpaid. And it's important to track that. You know, at least have a good idea how many hours a week you're spending. And if you're moving this is additional, as this is a new enterprise to your farm, look at this and track this as, you know, what's the additional labor it takes to get that animal to the processor, get that animal back from the processor, go to the farmer's markets. How many animals am I moving? Am I moving one animal a week or one animal a month? Am I having to go to 1 market, 4 market, 12 markets, whatever? And keep track of that labor, because those costs can really make a difference in whether it's worth doing. So a lot of people go, all right, so what, I have no idea where to, I just don't know where to start. I don't know what my cost of production is. So, you know, the easiest starting place is, what can you get for a lamb? If you want to evaluate this as a new enterprise, look at it from this standpoint. You know, if you haul the lamb off to a graded sale on the first Wednesday of the month to Union County, it's generally going to bring this. Let's start right there. That's a good starting place. And then look at the additional work it takes to get that meat to market and sell that meat, and see whether you can make it work. So start with the point you know, and that's lamb. Sorry, didn't change the word calves. But I was looking at the Monroe sale, 95 to 100 pound lamb, about $1.85 a pound, $185. So let's just use that as a starting point. Maybe you're making money at that. Maybe you can't make money at that. But if you take that and you're going to take it to Piedmont Custom Meats in Gibsonville, and they're going to take it to Asheboro and they're going to process it, it's going to be $100. So that's your flat fee. It's going to cost you $100 whether that lamb weighs 45 pounds or 150 pounds. It's a $100 bill to get it processed. So we'd take that and we add that. So that's $285 we're at. And then you've got to figure in, you've got cost of marketing, transportation, etc. We're going to throw $40 in there. That's probably way on the low side, especially starting out. But, you know, that'll kind of cover your gas. Maybe you cover your gas up there if you're doing several. And a little bit of gas to the local farmer's market to sell it or bring it back to the farm. So if you take a 95 to 100 pound lamb, you're looking probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a 55 pound carcass weight. And out of that, once you get it cut, and once they trim out the bones and, you know, trim off the extra fat and package everything, you're probably looking in the neighborhood of 45 pounds of finished product. Now, a 100 pound lamb can mean a world of different things. A 100 pound lamb for a Katahdin may come back and be extraordinarily fat compared to a 100 pound lamb live weight. There's a Hampshire or something like that may actually be on the skinny side and extremely lean. So that finished product depends a lot on your genetics, and so you need to take that in consideration. But so for this and for easy math, we're kind of figuring that you're getting about a 57% yield, and of that you're getting somewhere around probably around 75-80% of that back as finished product. And this is also going to make a big difference depending on how many bone-in products you get. So if you're getting a lot of bone-in products, you're getting all the ribs back, you're getting the rib chops, You're getting leg of lamb roast, you're getting shoulder roast where they're not doing a lot of trimming, you get the necks back. You know, this will be higher. If you're doing an all ground product or all boneless product, this could be significantly lower. So just take all these numbers with a grain of salt. We're estimating, but the point is to show you kind of how to come up with your numbers. So if you take that, and we take that $325 cost, and we divide it by our 45 pounds, our 55-pound carcass weight, and our 45 pounds of finished product, that means our break even to get our $185 for our lamb with the additional cost added into it is somewhere in the neighborhood of $7.22 a pound on the finished product. And that's straight through. Now, when I'm saying 45 pounds of finished product back, we're talking about your ground product, we're talking about your bone-in roast, we're talking about your soup bones, all these products, you know, that are coming back. So the average of those needs to be somewhere in the $7.22 a pound finished weight for a break even. And that's taking into account these numbers. And if you're selling a live carcass weight, that would be in the $5.91 a pound range for the carcass weight pricing. Now, you know, why is this important? Because maybe if you go down to Sam's Club and you price this out, ground lamb could be $5 a pound. And if you try to price off of that, then generally, you know, you're going to be underpriced. One of the things, you know, as a starting point, ground should be your basic average cost of this at least. So if you're going to get into this, your ground and that type product needs to be $7.22 a pound at least. Because the reason I say that is, and everything should be comparable to ground. So if you have a bone-in shoulder roast, you need to figure out have an idea of what percentage that is bone and have it priced to where it's comparable to ground. Because if you took that meat off the bone and ground it, you ought to be able to get at least ground price out of it. And so that kind of gives you a starting point and an estimate point for evaluating your cost. Now, we're doing this to add value to it, right? So all we've done so far is we've taken into account what we could haul this thing to the sale for and then added the additional cost to it. But if you want to, let's make it worth our while. Let's say we want to double our lamb price. And if we do that to get, instead of $185, that's $370 on a lamb, then we need to be somewhere around $11.33 finished weight per package on average. If your ground lamb prices, and I think most of them on the local pasture raised reports are running around $12 to $13 a pound on ground weights. Loin chops somewhere between $16 and $20 a pound. Your racks are somewhere between $18 and $29 a pound. You know, really the only thing that you should be selling less than that ground price would be things like soup bones, your bone-in roast, especially things like shoulder that are going to carry a little higher percentage bone. Maybe those are cheap, a little bit cheaper on a per pound price to account for that bone. Liver, kidneys, and such. But, you know, think about it that way. So at this point, you want to figure out what's your break-even price. What do you need to charge just to be where you are? Now, the challenge here is you're going to put a lot more time into selling this lamb as meat than you are going to be to stick that lamb on a trailer and haul him down to the sale once a month and drop him off with 40 of his buddies. You know, you got to look at that cost. So you've got to add enough value to it, or have enough room to add enough value to it that you can actually make a little extra money over what you could just haul the live lamb off. That's another one of the challenges with lamb is, you know, it seems like no matter what size your lambs are, 150, 175 bucks is what they cost. Whether it's a weaned lamb or whether it's a yearling lamb or whether it's an old ewe, 150 to 225 is kind of the commodity window on there. And so, you know, you've got to really take into account, you know, can you add a little value to it at any given stage over what you're doing and make it worth your while, because it does take a significant expense. If you look at this, we got $185 as our starting point, $100 in processing, and at least, like I said, 40 is a very conservative number. So 150, we've almost got as much in the after the lamb is dead than we do up to the point of raising him up to the point that we take him to the slaughter plant. So, you know, you need to add some value to that, because that's a risk you're taking if you can't sell that. Other options you've got to incorporate and explore meat production is look at mutton. Coal ewes and rams yield a lot better. They can be a lot bigger in size. They can be a little bit fattier, depending on what kind of condition they're in. But they make excellent roast, and they make excellent ground meat. We've done that in the past, and we can capture, you know, instead of getting $200 for you at a local sale barn, maybe by adding $100 to them, we get them ground, and we get, you know, 125 pounds of meat back. 120, well, not quite that much, but you say you get 100 pounds of meat back out of a big ewe at $12 a pound. That's $1,200. That's a pretty significant increase in the value of final value of that animal if you can sell that ground, and just store ground and do some ground packages. So, but one thing about it, you got to know what you're selling. You need to learn about the cuts. American Lamb Board has, you know, some good resources on this. Learn about the cuts, learn how to cook the cuts. Knowing a simple recipe can make a world of difference to your customers. When you're at the farmer's market and they ask, what do you like to do with your lamb chops? Knowing something you can rattle off the top of your head can make the difference between selling and not selling that product. Yeah, simple go-to on lamb. If it's a whole muscle cut, olive oil, garlic, rosemary, salt, and pepper. Throw it on the grill, do it medium rare. Simple. Doesn't sound like much, and you can use that for just about any whole muscle cut. But the thing is, to a customer, that makes all the world the difference. You've just reinforced, even though they can go home and look it up on Google, you've given them a little boost of confidence that they can handle cooking lamb. Because not a lot of people do a lot of lamb. It's expensive cut. It's not something they eat on a regular basis. It's kind of like seafood or oysters or something like that. You know, it's expensive. It's an investment. It's a special occasion thing. So being able to rattle off something really quick like that, or a meatball recipe or something, can make a world of difference in how they see it. When you're doing this, go to the processor and look at this stuff hanging. Especially if they've got other lambs in there. It's always great. If you can get into the cooler at the processor and look at your animals hanging there before they cut them up, go in, look at your animals, but look at what's around them. So if they're hanging in amongst 20 lambs, what do you see about it? How do they rank in size? How do they rank in fat covering? You know, how about muscling? How do they look compared to those other lambs? And that gives you an idea of where you are in your local market. Inventorying those packages so you know what you're getting back, and that gives you a baseline that over the years you can start to develop an idea of what your yields are. And like I said, learning to cook it all. Encourage feedback from your customers. For every person that complains, you're probably going to have 15 or 20 people that didn't like something but aren't going to tell you that. But what you want to do is you want to encourage, especially your good close friends and customers, to give you that feedback and let you know, how was it? Was it tough? Was it tender? You know, is there something? There's not a lot you can do with it once it's there, but it's good to know, because then you can adjust your suggestions. If you've got a lamb that comes back really tough, maybe you want to change from grilling to braising recommendation on the cuts. And one thing about it is, if you get it, if you can't guarantee it's a quality thing, just don't sell it. If you get one back, if you have a lamb that looks like it's about to drop dead of worms and it's a razorback, you know, you can see its backbone protruding, don't haul that thing to the market. You know, do something else with it. Either keep it and get it straightened out or whatnot. But the worst thing you can do is have a really poor product that gets out into your customers. And if you sell them something that's overly tough and overly lean, their chances are they're not even going to bother to tell you about it. They're just not even going to come This is an example of a hog spreadsheet. If you're decent at Excel, you can set this up. If not, you can consult with your kids or grandkids. But just make a simple spreadsheet and put back. So do an inventory when they come back. This is a hog, but same thing for lambs. Lamb chops and how many packs or how many packs and or how many pounds. One simple thing we always did was look at it and count how many packs you got and just kind of eyeball it and say, all right, we got 12 packs back. They were 1.5 pounds a pack, So we would put 12 times 1.5 pounds. So 18 pounds would be our thing. You put your selling price, and what you can do here is once you get it all together, you can play with this and you can look at you can play with the selling price number of what you got back. And what you'll find is that, a small difference on these items where you get the most back can make a world of difference on what you get overall on the animal. But this is a good way, and just save those as a spreadsheet, and that'll give you your thing moving forward. If you're not sure on your pricing, this is a really neat tool from Cornell University, and it's the Cornell Meat Price Yield Calculator. We've got a link to this on our NC Choices webpage, ncchoices.com. If you go to it, it actually walks you through, and you can put in and take out your pricing calculator to the nth degree. It starts by asking you what your goals are. And so if your goal is to add $100 of value to that lamb, then that you put that in as a goal, and then you walk through and you add in your prices, and it says, what does it cost to raise a lamb? How many lambs do you take to the market at one time? What does it cost you to go to the market and back? Or the packing house and back? How long does it take you to go pick up the meat? How many farmers markets do you have to go through to sell one lamb? It accounts for a lot of these factors. And if you're serious about getting into selling meat, I highly recommend that you go here and play with it. See if I can get it to play. I just kind of ran through it. But it will give you a good way of evaluating your pricing. And it kind of takes into production and marketing as separate items. You can take it out. You can figure in value-added products like smoked products, or whatever. Ask you what your marketing channels are. How do you want to sell that animal? Because that makes a world of difference. And by the cuts or by hanging weight, and ask you what species. But it's well worth going and playing with. And once again, knowing what your product looks like can make a world of difference. Going and seeing it hanging. If you really want to learn about it, talk to your processor. I'm sure if they've got time and you can usually squeeze into the floor, you're probably not going to be able to cut. You're probably not going to be able to hold up production. But if you wanted to attend while they cut your lamb up to see what yours looks like, a lot of times that can be arranged with some notice. When it comes to marketing, if you want to look at selling lambs, one of the easiest things, one of the things we found in working with farmers for over 20 years now is that to be successful in selling niche meats is you've got to be able to sell that entire animal. So it does no good if you have all the market in the world for lamb chops if you can't get rid of the other 80% of that animal. So one of the most efficient ways is to sell in bulk, the whole lamb. Have a customer that will pay you for a whole lamb, and you deliver it, and it's one shot. You deliver it, you stick it in the freezer, and they pay you, and you're done. There's no piecemealing at markets. There's no all of a sudden 2 weeks later realizing that you've got 75 shanks in the freezer in the middle of summer trying to figure out what to do with them, or having to wait on winter to roll around before it's lamb shank time. But one of our most recent projects is the Meat Suite website. This is developed by Cornell, just like the Meat Suite calculator. And we've adapted this and have a launched in North Carolina version. We currently have about 97 97 or 98 farms on here, and you're able to select what you want to sell. This is a good place, to do your scouting. Look and see what people are charging. This is dedicated to selling in bulk only. So we're looking to sell whole, half lambs, or bulk packages. Another consumer-friendly tip that we've learned from working with this is, rather than trying to sell a whole animal, a lot of times it's a lot easier if you put together a sampler pack. So it may be a 5-pound pack for $60. That's $12 a pound, getting your $12 a pound price. And it may have a pack, 2 chops, a pack of kebabs, a pack of ground, some soup bones, and some shanks. It allows you to put together a variety pack for the customers, but they can get a sampling of the whole lamb. It may be an eighth, it may be a tenth of what you get back on the whole lamb. But what it allows is, it takes up less freezer space than a whole lamb. It also gives them the opportunity to buy in bulk and get a little bit of savings versus having to buy, a $800 or $900, $500, $800, $900 lamb. They can buy it as that, in a smaller portion for $50 or $60 or $100. Something that's a little more consumer price friendly price point, but also allows you to add a little bit of value to it too. So maybe instead of the $12 you would get on a straight through, or $10 you get on a straight through lamb, maybe it's more like $12 for this. So you get a little higher price point. You get a little more headache, but you still move the whole animal in proportion. In order to go to this is a free service, but you can create a profile on Meat Suite and advertise. We've had a really good response to this, especially given the COVID stuff. We'd planned to launch this in July of this year. We actually launched it in the first week of April. And in the first week, we had over 17,000 hits within North Carolina to the website and visiting farms, trying to make connections. And we've had a lot of our farmers have reported back and that they've been successfully connecting with consumers. I'll go back to we'll go through the meat. I'll go to Meat Suite here in a second. Another good place, ncchoices.com. We've got a lot of resources around selling meat as well as production. If you're looking for videos about to share with your consumers, we've got a lot of those up. We had a project a few years ago where we actually did some videos about buying in bulk, about cooking offcuts of meat, how to braise something. And those of you are welcome to go there. Share those, use those for your marketing and promotion. Share those on your social media to make your consumers aware. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. We try to stockpile this stuff here. And we've just redid this to make this a lot easier to find. You can go there, you can find the list of NCDA and USDA inspected facilities in North Carolina that work for meat handlers. You can find information on getting your meat handler's license. You can find consumer information. You can find production information. It's a lot of it's there. Real quickly, here is my email. If anybody has any questions, so NC Choices maintains a listserv where we send out things like the pasture reports, other things that are unique to niche meat production and marketing in North Carolina. We also have, that's our newsletter list. We also have a classifieds list that we maintain where you can sell if you've got feeder lambs or you've got ewes or rams that you want to sell or equipment. You can send an email out through that and it'll hit. I think we've got about 2,000 people on our newsletter list and about 800 or 900 on our classifieds. So I'm going to stop sharing a second and I'm going to reshare and just run over here real quick to Meat Suite. And so this is the Meat Suite website. It's meatsuite.com. And what this allows consumers to do is come on and they can say, I want to find a farm within 25 miles of me. They can put in their zip code and they can choose what they want to sell. And so they can look and say, all right, what kind of lamb do we have? They can hit search. And this is developed in New York, but we have North Carolina on here. And so we have 10 farms that are selling lamb in North Carolina. And so If you look, it gives you the opportunity. You can create a profile. This is for free. You can go in there and sign up today. And you can put in different things. Go to Minka Farm. It gives you a chance for one picture. It has a Google Maps to show where you're at for the location, has your contact information, gives you an opportunity to tell a little bit about your farm, what's special about you. And then we do require bulk sales and pricing be put on, including including processing costs. So like a live lamb here is $200, and that is, you can pick up or we can take it to the processor. It's $200 for a live lamb. Meat, CSAs, those are the bulk packages I was talking about earlier. But the pricing does need to be, we do require that it's posted. But if you're interested in this, even if you don't have lamb available, lamb can be rather seasonal. Create a profile, get it up. People looking for lamb year round, and it's better for them to know that you have it and that it may be next, this fall before you have any ready, than it is for you to wait and count on them to come back looking for it this fall. Like I said, we've got, let's see, I'll just try to clear this, clear search. And we have 97 farms active. And as you can see, you go down through here and they're listed. And then over here on the right-hand side is the species dot that tells what they've got. Anyway, it's a really good opportunity. Go in there if you can. And I guess with that, we're at 7:27, and I have about run my mouth long enough and turn it over to y'all for questions. Does anybody got any questions?
Lee, we really appreciate you doing this webinar tonight. This has been great information. I learned a lot about meat handling and NC Choices. So if anybody has anything for Lee, would like to go ahead and ask him some questions, that would be great. Also, if you did not get a chance to put your email in the chat, please do that so we can send you the information from this evening.
And we'll add one thing to that is they're going to be collecting the emails, and that one thing about it, a lot of our program, this Meat Suite, is a grant funded program that's provided by USDA grant. And so they always ask us for feedback when we do things like this. So if we'll probably send you an email. It'll probably come from somebody at NC Choices with a quick survey or a evaluation, just, if you will, just fill that out and return that. Try not to be too in depth, but just, got to keep our grant funders happy and show them that we're reaching people. So.
Anybody have any questions?
It's a quiet bunch tonight.
You just did such an excellent job educating today.
Hey, I have a quick question. What do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're first starting to handle meat or to sell and market to consumers, either with in their production costs or just handling? What do you think are some mistakes that people make that we could maybe avoid?
That's good. One of the biggest issues is I see a lot of people getting started, and first thing they do is they go to Food Line and they look and they say, oh, they're selling it for this. That's why I've got to be cheaper than them. And that is not the case. And that we get a lot of people and they'll sell a lot of stuff and they'll be like, man, this is going great. And then a year from now, they're out of the picture because they're not making any money. And so, the first thing is take a hard look at it. And even if you're not great at record keeping, if you've been doing this very long at all, you should have an idea of what you've been selling your animals for and whether you're making money or not. And if you're not making money, try to figure out, okay, how much do I lack in making money, and back out from there, and figuring out what your goal is. A lot of people get into it. It's just kind of a sideline. We're homesteading. We're raising our own meat. This is for my family. And if I sell a little bit to offset my feed cost, I'm happy. Others, That's a very different goal from somebody going out and saying, I want to make a living selling meat. You know, it's a very different margin. It's a very different volume requirement. It's just different all the way around. And, you know, a lot of people that I've worked with in the past, they don't sit down and ask themselves those hard questions. Is what do I want out of this? For this to be sustainable, it's got to be sustainable for the animals. It's got to be sustainable for the environment. By God, it's got to be economically sustainable too. If you're going to make it, it's going to be something that's going to last and not be just a hobby. Not that there's anything wrong with it being a hobby. I've talked to people before that were selling ground lamb for $4 a pound because they wanted people to experience lamb. And they had money. And it was, to them, it was like, this is a tax write-off. We're just trying to provide our, you know, lamb and get more people to experience lamb. And that's a valid reason for doing it. It kind of sucks when you're the guy trying to sell it for $12 a pound beside them. But, you know, it's a very different reason from that guy that's trying to make a living at it. So take a hard look at it and decide what do you seriously need, and really looking at it and trying to figure out what your markets are and looking around and seeing how much of a market there is. For us, one of our, you know, lamb, we did on our farm, we did pork was our main thing. We did chicken, we did beef. And then we always had lamb and goat. And we probably sold 10% of what we would sell would be lamb and goat. And surprisingly, you know, a lot of people would ask us, well, was the ethnic markets for the goats and the lambs? It's like, no, it's actually one of our biggest customer bases were the baby boomers. Older, white, economically secure baby boomers that were in the Peace Corps in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and lived in India and loved this lamb curry dish. And so every week or every other week, they would buy a pound of lamb stew from us, or a pound of ground lamb, or, you know, they were in Honduras for 2 years with Peace Corps. Those are the type customers you want. They're not price sensitive. It's a nostalgia thing. It's kind of like selling $100 turkey at Thanksgiving. If you tried to make a living selling $100 turkeys every day, it doesn't happen. But because it's a special occasion, it's a nostalgia thing, it's a social event, then people are willing to pay for it more. And that seems to be where lamb falls a lot of the time. And that's both a blessing and a curse. It's a curse because people just don't eat a lot of lamb here. You know, a lot of your market is also going to be the people that have transplants from the Northeast, New York and Massachusetts, Boston, New York, New Jersey type folks that grew up and ate a lot of lamb. Jewish communities, if you have connections with them, those are the type of groups you want to consider your market and reach out to and focus on, because those are the people that go out of their way to buying it. You know, it's not the same crowd that's going to be buying Boston butts from you. Or pork chops from you all the time. It's trying to identify that market. And that's one of the most important things is, do you have the customers that like lamb and will buy it? Or, you know, do you have customers that don't know what lamb is, but they're adventurous customers and they're willing to try it? But, you know, that's kind of hard to base a business off of something people are willing to try.
Those are great points. Thank you very much for sharing that. Anybody else have any other last parting questions? We want to thank everybody for joining us for our first webinar series. And Lee, thank you so much for presenting today. And again, Andy, thank you again for putting this together. And I think if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and sign off.
All right, sounds great. Thanks for having me, and hopefully one day soon we'll all get to do this in person again. So